Before we begin, please hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for being part of the story. This story is a first-hand account of my experience with my girlfriend. 2 years ago, during a long holiday, my girlfriend and I decided to visit my relatives in a small, remote province. We planned the trip during this time because many of our extended family members were also gathering to reconnect, as it had been years since we last met. Some of my relatives had even reached out, urging me to come and reminding me how long it had been since our last reunion. Thinking it was a great opportunity to catch up, I agreed. I hadn't been back to my hometown since I was a child, and my memories of my relative's house were incredibly vague. When I finally arrived, I couldn't recognize anything. Everything had changed. The roads, houses, and the entire area had undergone more than 3 decades of transformation, leaving nothing familiar to me. When we arrived at the main house, our relatives, young and old, welcomed us warmly. We caught up on each other's lives and reminisced about the past, filling the air with a sense of warmth and nostalgia. After our conversations, my cousin mentioned that most of the bedrooms in the main house were already occupied. Fortunately, he had recently built a new house nearby, with no one having moved in yet. He offered to let my girlfriend and me stay there during our visit. I agreed without hesitation. The new house was just a short walk down the same alley as the main house. With our bags in hand, my girlfriend and I made our way there. The alley was unusually quiet, most likely because it was a holiday, and many families had either gone on trips or returned to their hometowns for the holidays. After a short walk, we arrived at the house at the very end of the alley. It was a modest 2-story structure, blending wood and concrete in its design. The lower floor was made of concrete, while the upper floor was crafted from wood. The design was an interesting mix of modern and traditional architecture. When we stepped inside, it was clear the house was newly built, just as my cousin had mentioned. The lower floor gleamed with shiny new tiles, while the upper floor had a rustic wooden finish that exuded a warm countryside charm. My cousin told us we could use the bedroom on the lower floor since the upper floor hadn't been divided into rooms yet. At that time, it was still an open space, completely empty. I thought the house was perfectly fine for our stay, but my girlfriend's expression told a different story. Her face tensed with unease, and she wore a worried look I wasn't used to seeing. After showing us around, my cousin left, leaving just the two of us alone in the house. Almost immediately, my girlfriend admitted that she felt uneasy about the house. She couldn't explain why, but said it felt strange, oppressive, and unnervingly quiet. I brushed it off and tried to calm her down, suggesting it was just nervousness from being in an unfamiliar place. I reassured her that she'd get used to it. That night, the two of us went to bed in the downstairs bedroom. Everything seemed normal until midnight. Already anxious, my girlfriend struggled to fall asleep. She tossed and turned, her mind restless. Even when she managed to drift off, she remained half awake, her senses on high alert. In the dead of night, she suddenly woke up, startled. She told me she felt an unsettling presence in the room, as if someone were there with us, moving quietly. She said she heard faint footsteps pacing near the bed. Terrified, she slowly opened her eyes and turned toward the door. What she saw froze her in terror. Standing there was a woman dressed in an elegant pink traditional outfit. Her skin was pale and her expression stern, her eyes fixed on my girlfriend with an unrelenting intensity. Horrified, she tried to call out to me, but to her shock, her voice wouldn't come out. She tried to move but found herself completely paralyzed. All she could do was lie there, staring at the mysterious woman. Her thoughts raced. Was this real, or was it just a vivid nightmare? Despite her confusion, one thing was certain. She was terrified. If it was a dream, it felt so unnervingly real that it sent chills down her spine. Moments later, the woman slowly turned her back and walked through the door, which was still closed. disappearing before her very eyes. As soon as the woman vanished, my girlfriend finally regained her ability to move. She bolted upright in fear and shook me awake. Still half asleep and groggy, I listened as she frantically recounted what had just happened. I admit I wasn't fully alert and didn't take her story seriously at the time, thinking she was just having a bad dream or letting her imagination run wild. After a few moments of comforting her, we eventually went back to sleep. The next morning, I noticed that my girlfriend still seemed unsettled. Worried, I sat her down for a serious talk about what had happened the night before. With a scared look on her face, she went over everything again, repeatedly emphasizing that what she saw was real. I tried to reassure her, but at the same time, I couldn't help remaining skeptical. I figured she might have just been exhausted from our trip, which could explain what she experienced. I decided to keep the incident to myself and not share it with anyone. Later that day, I bumped into my cousin and chatted with him for a bit. He then asked how our stay at the house had been and if we had slept well. Without giving it much thought, I told him everything was fine and that we'd slept comfortably. The day passed uneventfully, and I spent the entire time participating in family activities. That evening, my girlfriend and I returned to the wooden house for another night. As night fell, we both prepared for bed. However, something unexpected happened before we even managed to fall asleep. Suddenly, strange noises came from upstairs, the second floor. The sound was unmistakably that of footsteps, slow and deliberate, dragging across the wooden floorboards with a distinct creaking noise. The noise was undeniably human. I strained my ears to listen, but before I could make sense of it, my girlfriend nudged me, her face as pale as a ghost.
"Do you hear that?"
she whispered. I nodded, confirming that I could hear it too. Seeing her growing panic, I called out toward the upper floor, "Is anyone up there?" Even though I already knew my cousin had told us, the second floor was completely empty, with no rooms, no furniture, and no one living there. Driven by curiosity about the source of the strange noise, my girlfriend and I decided to hold hands and climb the creaky wooden staircase. Each step seemed to amplify the eerie atmosphere, making the air feel even heavier. Once we reached the second floor, I switched on the light above the walkway, illuminating the entire space. Just as my cousin had described, it was an open, empty area, covered in dust and filled with a chilling, unnatural cold. We scanned the area for anything unusual, but found nothing out of place. Every door and window was securely locked from the inside. Suddenly, my girlfriend gasped, pointing toward a corner of the room.
"Look, what is that?"
I followed her gaze and saw her standing in the corner, staring into a gap in the wooden wall. Curious, I stepped closer and noticed a slight opening where the wooden planks didn't quite fit together. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the gap. What I saw made my heart race and sent a chill down my spine. There, nestled inside the gap, stood a wooden pillar wrapped tightly in fabric of 3 sacred colors. It all clicked into place. This was a protective charm, a talisman meant to ward off ghosts. The wooden column gleamed unnaturally, as if seeping oil. One glance, and we both knew. This pillar was the source of the strange happenings over the past 2 nights, and those sacred fabrics meant to ward off ghosts. Well, they had failed to keep the ghosts away. Terrified, we both quickly went back downstairs and decided to leave the lights on all night as we slept. The next morning, I went straight to my cousin to ask about the history of the wooden house. I recounted everything I had experienced over the past 2 nights. My cousin listened with a troubled expression. After a deep sigh, he confessed the truth. He admitted that he had purchased construction materials for the house at an extremely low price from a demolished property. He hadn't realized that one of the wooden pillars he had bought was possessed until after the house was already built. He went on to explain that during construction, the workers often reported seeing a woman in traditional dress wandering near the pillar. At first, my cousin dismissed these stories as mere superstition, but as the reports became more frequent, unease began to settle in. Not wanting to remove the pillar, as it had already been installed, he decided to cover it with wooden planks, hoping to block it off and end the disturbances. Unfortunately, the strange events didn't stop, and in the end, he and his family decided they could never move into the house. After hearing the full story, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I knew then that I couldn't stay another night in that house. Without hesitation, my girlfriend and I packed our things and left that very day.